Welcome to the Jeff Knows Inc. Entrepreneurial Podcast with your host, Jeff Lopes. Jeff has over 2 decades experience as a serial entrepreneur, building brands like Kimura from his home basement to a multi-million-dollar global brand that has sold over 250,000 pairs of boxing gloves. Jeff's here to educate, guide, and drive you on the process of bringing your ideas and dreams to reality with the inspiring stories from some of the top business minds.
Welcome to episode number 102 of the Jeff Knows Inc. podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Lopes. Super excited to have on today the host of Everyone Pulls the Tarp podcast, Andrew Moses. Great conversation. We talk sports, we talk business, we talk family, we talk memorabilia. Great conversation, everybody. Sit back and enjoy. We are live on the Jeff Knows Inc. podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Lopes. We got a smaller across the stage. Excited to have on today Andrew Moses, podcast host, entrepreneur. So many layers we're going to go through today, and we're going to have just a great conversation. I always start off by allowing our audience to know what you're up to, what you're currently do, and then we're going to dip into your story. Maybe current, might be past. We'll just let the story go and have some fun with it. So what are you currently up to, Andrew?
Jeff, well, first off, thanks for having me on the podcast. It's great to chat with you again. In terms of what I'm up to, I've always got my hands in a lot of things like you, for sure. But right now, I am on a personal mission to uncover the secrets to success. And every week, I'm talking to high performers, Olympians, pro athletes, elite coaches, CEOs, best-selling authors, musicians, you name it, to try and uncover these secrets to success. And I'm particularly interested in what makes great leaders, what makes great teammates, and what drives people's work ethic. So this is something that I embarked on earlier this year. But I wear a lot of different hats. I'm also the vice president of business development and marketing at a national consulting firm specializing in finance, technology, and business consulting. So I'm working with CXOs on all types of transformational business issues. And most importantly, I'm a dad to 2 little girls who are going to school virtually right now here in our living room and kitchen. So I spend a lot of time making sure that they have everything they need to go about their business too.
I love it. There's a lot of things we're going to talk about today. Also, Andrew is a huge collector of sports memorabilia. So I'm going to dive a little into that today, which is something I have a passion for as well. Your podcast, let's start off with that angle. You started it off when, and what was your mindset getting into a podcast? What was your original reasoning for starting a podcast?
So my podcast is called Everybody Pulls the Tarp. And early in 2020, so last year, I had decided that I wanted to embark on this mission to uncover the secrets to success. What made the highest performing people in the world successful? And I'm just naturally a very, very curious person. People say when you have dinner with me or lunch with me or we have coffee, I ask a million questions. I'm just genuinely curious. So what I thought was, I said, hey, I've got this great network of folks who I could tap into and learn and develop professionally and personally. But I'm also a giver, and I like to have people along with me on the journey and share the knowledge and insight. So I said, what better way, if I'm going to have these conversations on this mission to uncover the secrets to success, what better way to share that with others than a podcast? So I said, I'm going to sit down every week. I'm going to record the conversations, and people can listen to these essentially live. We record them, but we record them as if we're live, and people can hear almost as if they're eavesdropping on a conversation that we're having at a coffee shop or a restaurant about what made that individual successful. So again, it's called Everybody Pulls the Tarp. And I get a lot of questions about that. That is a mindset that I've lived by. And it started, Jeff, 17 years ago. My first internship, I was working in minor league baseball because at the time I thought I wanted to work in the business of sports. So I worked briefly as an intern for a baseball agent. I sent my resume to a bunch of minor league baseball teams, and I got an internship with the New York Yankee minor league affiliate in New Jersey. And at the time, I thought I was going to go in there and I was going to learn the business of sports. So I show up on the first day, And the CEO, general manager says, Andrew, it's great to have you. Tomorrow, bring a pair of old clothes and keep them in the locker room because you're going to help the grounds crew this summer pull the tarp on and off the field. And I said, come again? What am I going to do? And he says, you're going to help the grounds crew pull the tarp on and off the field. And I said, I don't understand. What are you talking about? Isn't there a grounds crew for that? I'm here to learn the business of sports. And he said, Andrew, we have the same field as the big leaguers, right? I said, yes. He said, we have the same dirt. I said, yes. He said, do we have the same grass? I said, yes. He said, the only difference is that up in the big league club, they may have 20 or 25 people on a grounds crew. Down here, we may have 6, 7, 8. So in the minor leagues, you better learn. Everybody pulls the tarp. And I pulled the tarp on and off the field that summer, probably 15, 20 times. I was the mascot. I parked cars. I set up moon bounces. I sold souvenirs. I did whatever was asked of me. And I tell people, and I'm not working in sports right now, I tell people it was the best career learning experience of my life. And I think I credit any success that I've had so far in my career to that experience, because it taught me that no task was beneath me, no task was above me, and everything was on the table, and that I needed to help the team, the organization, however was needed in the moment. So I'm on this mission to find these tarp pullers and these people who are willing to do whatever it takes. And along the way, we've recorded almost 50 conversations now on the Everybody Pulls the Tarp podcast. It's amazing. It's amazing what we've uncovered.
There's a little lesson I want to talk into there. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs that are starting off for the first time will learn this very quickly. You take on, and something you said at the beginning, you take on a lot of hats. And to make a business successful, and if you want it to be successful, taking a lot of hats at the beginning is necessary. And I find is individuals that go into entrepreneurship and they automatically hire all the staff, they all of a sudden they rent these offices. Those are the ones that why we have such a high failure rate. When I started, like I've built, since 8 companies I built and exited. The company that I've had for the longest time, Comoroware, it was once again starting from the ground. I had a little money saved, but I said I'm going to start from the ground zero, and I wore all the hats. I ran the company out of my house for 6 years. I wore all the hat, and the reason I took the company out of my house for 6 years because I knew this company had the potential to be an 8-figure, 9-figure company. But I realized if I put myself in a situation of overpaying rent and overpaying this. So what I said, I'm going to work on my house for 5-6 years. I'm going to save every penny I possibly can. So at year 6, I was able to, with cash, buy my first building, which now is our head office. So being able to work as many positions, understanding the many positions, learning the many positions in a business is so vital, because you can never put yourself atop of your employees. You always have to put yourself in the level where you could take on any task in that business and be able to run it. So I think it's a cool little lesson that you learned, and anybody can use that towards any form of business.
100%. And I think, the more I talk to entrepreneurs, in addition to you, Jeff, what I've learned and through my own experiences is that a couple things happen when you wear all those hats, right? So one is you have an understanding of the role, of all the different roles. So that gives you empathy. So that gives you empathy for the challenges of that role, things that maybe come up unexpectedly in that role that need to be addressed. And it also puts you in a position where you have, in my opinion, a much better sense as to what you need in the eventual person that you're going to hire to lead that function and wear that hat and then transition that hat over to them. So now you, as a leader, you have empathy, which to me is central to any, high performing leader, is having empathy and understanding. And you've walked in their shoes, and you can truly say, hey, you're going to deal with this. You're going to deal with this. When this pops up, you've experienced that. So you can put your arm around that person as the leader and say, I've been here. I can appreciate what you're going through. And that is a huge advantage in my opinion. Yeah.
And there's another little thing I'm going to throw in there as well. And that's one thing I do with all my companies. I do is every single position I learn, even if we open up a new position, I learn that position first. we create a company manual for that position step by step. And there's a reason why, because as an entrepreneur and as an owner of a business, you never know when one employee decides to walk out that door and not show up to work that day. So the game has to keep playing. So you need to be able to fill in that position. So if it might be you, it might be another employee, having a company manual or having yourself understand the position, you could jump into that position on the spot. So I think that's another aspect that's important, because you want to know how everything in a company runs. And like I said, I'm sure that CEO of the baseball team, he pulled the tarp how many times himself. So if one tarp puller didn't pull, he'd be able to jump in there. Being able to do that is so valid to keep the business flowing at all times, especially when we're dealing with a pandemic or something like that, right?
Absolutely. We're all being asked to operate in ways we've never been asked to operate before, right? The pandemic has forced everybody to be adaptable. And to adjust on the core, and deal with new challenges that pop up. I think about today, as we record this, today is the 100th day of my kindergartner's school today. They're celebrating the 100th day. And as I reflect on 100 days of school, what an amazing accomplishment for these kids and these teachers, because they have dealt with challenges like we've never seen before. So it's cool to see them celebrating. It's cool to see them celebrating, because they've had a chance to take on new things, and they'll be better off in the future once we go back to quote unquote normal.
Yeah. If we ever go back to quote unquote normal, the new normal will be always a little different. Let's talk about your collecting days. When did your passion for collecting sports memorabilia start? And you have quite a big collection. I have one too, but we're talking about that. You said, with your signed baseballs. When did that start? Was that something you started when you were younger? Was it something your dad brought you into? Like, how did that all start?
Yeah, it started as a young kid. One of my parents' friends, who unfortunately passed away at a pretty young age in his early 40s. He would go to conferences and trade shows, and when I was a kid, my parents' friend, and he wasn't that into sports. And at one of these trade shows was 86, one of the famed 86 New York Mets, Bobby Ojeda, and he signed a ball. And he didn't have any interest in the ball. He didn't have any kids at the time, so he gave me the ball. And I remember looking at the signed ball and thinking, like, this is beautiful. It's a crisp white baseball with beautiful red seams and this perfect blue ink ballpoint pen signature. And I remember asking my parents, so this means that the Mets pitcher touched this ball? He signed this for me, and I can keep this forever? And I was hooked. And from that, and Bobby Ojeda, was a good ball player, but he was not, a star by any sense. And then, later, I think it was later that year, my parents, went out to a collector showcase, and they bought me a Nolan Ryan autographed baseball. And that was the start of my Hall of Fame collection, which is something I'm very proud of, because I like to study. Again, it goes back to my curiosity. I like to study careers and statistics and what made people successful. And then I love to have a baseball signed by that player to commemorate it. So it really blossomed from there. I have over 400 autographed baseballs now in the collection. Many, many Hall of Famers. I have a U.S. president. I have folks that are Hall of Famers, all the way down to folks that people would never heard of. But many of these people that the average person wouldn't have heard of, maybe did something unique. Like it was a reliever who had a save in two sides of the doubleheader for the first time in history or whatever. And I love collecting things like that, because there's stories. And I try and collect as much of my memorabilia on my own, directly. Either directly through with the player or the player's representation or collector showcases. Some things I'll buy. I've also written letters to players. I started doing that when I was a kid. It was actually maybe the first way that my parents taught me to budget. They would buy me, let's say $50 worth of stamps, which went a lot further back then, for sure. And I would pick out, as many cards as I could to mail as a little kid to players. And I'd write the letter by hand. I'd address the envelope. I'd give them an envelope to send it back to me. I'd stamp it. I'd give them a stamp to send it back. So it was a little bit like gambling, because you weren't sure it was going to come back. And I built my collection a lot that way. But now it's something that I just love. You can see some of the things sitting back here in the video. It's just something to me that as life gets stressful and things get crazy, I can pick up a baseball and it kind of transports me to either a time in baseball history or the time when I got the baseball, or who gave it. I think about who gave it to me, and it's really refreshing.
Would you ever look into that field as a career or a business?
I haven't. I haven't to this point. I've been reading more and more lately about the investment opportunity that sports cards and collectibles have. But to this point, Jeff, I have generally tried to decouple it and keep it purely as a hobby. But and one of those things that I go back to when I find when things are stressful professionally or personally, and you just want to. One of my favorite things to do, people who aren't into collecting will think this is crazy, but if I'm stressed, like I might just pull out a binder of autographed cards by New York Mets and reorganize it by decade or something just to change it up. Or I'll do it by alphabetized or it's calming. It's fun. It's one of these things where I think, either you understand it or you don't. But yeah, from an early age for me, it was one of these things that I've always been passionate about.
And I think it's important for people to have passions, and something like a hobby is so important because it takes you out of your realm of the reality of every single day, and it just takes you into a place where you can just enjoy something. And sometimes I would say it should be on a regular basis, us giving ourselves that space, that moment of just that breathing time. And I think if you do it through your cards, that's a form of almost meditation in a way. People might call it something else, but that is a form of meditation. Like sitting there, reorganizing your cards. It's just a way to unwind and not think for that half an hour, and just let your body just relax. So I think it's so important. And being a valid collector and now dealer too, I do it as a little side thing. It's fun. It's fun. It's something where if you're a sports guy and you've enjoyed sports your whole life, like we talked about this. That was my side hustle. At like 12, 13, my dad would drive me to sports card shows, and I would go in with $25, buy a bunch of packs, flip them, sell them, come back with $100, and that'd be my spending money. And I would be like the hero of all my friends because I was the only guy at 12, 13 with $100 in his pocket because I was able to understand and the hustle part of it. And then it went on to collecting, and over the years, my whole basement is almost like a man cave with all sports memorabilia and stuff. So I've always built my office here. Is every wall in this place has some form of autograph, even where all my staff says there's just memorabilia everywhere. Because it's something I just love looking at and touching and feeling kind of the same kind of a ordeal what you're saying, right? Which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm looking right now across the way here, and I have a jersey signed by Mike Piazza, one of the great Mets of all time. And when you look at that, I remember where I was when Mike Piazza signed it. Yeah. I remember who I was with. I remember some of the great moments that Mike Piazza had with the Mets. Yeah. And I also just think about sometimes, the connection between sports and life, and how sometimes sports is there for you in challenging times, in difficult times, periods of adversity. And it either disconnects you from whatever the reality is at the moment for 3 hours or whatever. It gives you a little reprieve, or it inspires you, right? I mean, yesterday was the 41st anniversary of the Miracle on Ice, when the famed U.S. Olympic hockey team, Jim Craig and Mike Eruzione accomplished something that nobody thought possible back in 1980. Yeah. And you read articles about that. It inspired people to do things that they didn't think were possible. And that to me is what's very cool about the memorabilia too, is what's possible. What's possible.
Yeah, I love that. I love that side of it too. Yeah, it's just, and sports in general. I mean, this is going to another angle, is just how many people were so desperate just to watch sports when the pandemic stopped and all the 4 major leagues slowed down and stopped. it was just like, wow, there's nothing to go on a Sunday or on a Saturday night for us to watch hockey, or on a Sunday, there was nothing to watch, no baseball. So having that back, and I know some people are very against sports being back and why they are allowed to be back. That pastime is so important for a lot of people. Is that a Saturday night for 2 hours, 3 hours, they just get away from everything and just they just be able to enjoy the entertainment aspect of it, right?
Yeah, well, I think that was one of the really interesting things at the onset of the pandemic was the absence of sports and entertainment, because and some of that live entertainment, because those are the things that historically have always been there for us. I mean, even at the time of September 11th and those tragic attacks here in the United States, I was living about 45 minutes from where the World Trade Center was. Baseball returned 10 or 11 days after, I want to say about 10 or 11 days. And it was a little controversial at the time, because people wondered, is it appropriate to bring baseball back? Yeah. The minute baseball was back in New York, everybody knew it was the right thing to have baseball back.
It brought a bond.
It brought a bond.
Yeah.
It brought a bond. And I remember the Mets played the Atlanta Braves. And at the time, the Mets and the Braves were bitter rivals. They were kind of neck and neck in the division races those years. The Braves kind of always had the Mets number at that point. And they, at the end of the national anthem, they crossed the foul lines and they began embracing one another.
Yeah.
And they said, we're all in this. And I think that was something that was challenging at the beginning of the pandemic, was we didn't have sports to bring us together, to transport us from reality to a breather. I mean, you think about some of the ways through the years that after all kinds of tragedy and adversity, teams and sports heroes in their local markets rally to organize the community, fundraise, things like that. Sports has always been there for us. So yeah, at the time, I know it was controversial, and I was just hopeful that, within the parameters of what made sense scientifically and medically, that the sports leagues would figure out a way to create some semblance of activity. And here we are.
We're going to go somewhere which I had zero planning going on today, but you brought it up. So I just want to dive into that quickly. 9/11, you live 45 minutes from the trade towers. What were you home at that time, and what was your mindset? Did you hear it? Was it just on TV? Did you feel it from 45 minutes away? Like, give me the rundown of that day too. Sure.
Well, I'm 35 years old right now. That I was in high school during the attacks of 9/11.
How old are you? You're 45?
I'm 35. 35. I'm 35. I was in high school during the September 11th attacks, and I know exactly where I was. I was sitting in an orthodontist chair having my braces taken off. Okay, so I was a little late to get the braces, but this was the big day. I was going to get them taken off. I was the first appointment in the morning, and I'm sitting in the orthodontist chair, and he's got a little TV, and the news is on, and you see the first plane hit the tower, and then you think it may be just an accident. A pilot that had made a mistake, and he just went back to what he was doing. And then I said, I think that another plane just hit another tower. And he said, that must be a replay. And I said, no, I think that's another plane. And now everything was changed. So he finished up the work, and we were glued to the TV. But for us, we're 45 minutes. I grew up 45 minutes away from Manhattan, and we go into the mode of starting to make phone calls, because a lot of my friends have parents who work in the World Trade Center or work near the World Trade Center. Lots of folks in our town either go to the train, go to the bus, commute into New York City. So we went into kind of mode of calling the people that were close to us that we knew might be there, to try and see where they were and what their whereabouts were. And that was really tricky, because the cell service at the time, it was the early days of cell phones. The cell service was chaotic. You couldn't get through to people. You were getting these busy signals and call drops, and you really couldn't reach people. So I remember the first kind of exhale, was a dear friend of my parents who worked in the World Trade Center. When we made contact with him and with his wife, and knew that he was safe and accounted for, we exhaled briefly. But then there was a vigil that night locally, because there were a number of people in our town who weren't as fortunate to escape that day. And, you didn't know at that night where things were. The rescue efforts were still underway. So I remember it being really, really powerful. A lot of folks got together. We went to our synagogue and just, sang and prayed and tried to acknowledge the gravity of the situation. And, it was really, really, really challenging. And again, just being so close to it geographically, knowing so many people who were so directly affected. I remember later that summer, I was working at a camp and I was a bus counselor. And, one of the families that that I had on the bus lost their father in the World Trade Center. And these were little kids. And I remember I just made it my mission that summer to make their life as easy as I possibly could, knowing that nothing I could do could make their life easy. So when we got to their bus stop, I tried to smile a little brighter, hop off the bus a little faster. I brought the 3-year-old into my seat next to me. I gave him my clipboard. I had him checking off the people as we were picking them up. I wanted to do anything I could to just make their lives a little bit easier. So it was, that day was interesting. I haven't thought about it in a long time. So I'm glad we're talking about it, but it is certainly interesting.
It's crazy how anybody roughly, I'm obviously 9 years older than you, but anybody in our realm could, if you ask anybody, they could specifically tell you exactly where they were. I was on an elliptical machine at a gym, working out, looking at the TVs, and exact same thing. One plane in, I was like, the second plane came in, and all of a sudden you saw just everybody from the gym walking towards the cardio machines because that's where all the TVs were aligned, and everybody's just watching it. And at that point, wasn't married, but my fiance, I can't even remember if we were engaged already, but my wife now, but she was working at an insurance building in downtown Toronto, and it was next door was a U.S. consulate. It was attached to a U.S. consulate. And as that was going through your head, you're like, U.S., they're going to be taxed in other cities. And I'm trying to get a hold of her. I'm like, you guys see what's happening. You got to get out of there. And she's like, my bosses don't let me go. They're like, we're okay. I can't leave work today. And I'm like, you got to get, I'm screaming at her on the phone, and I'm trying to call my parents. And it's just like, same thing, even though we were in Toronto, the cell service was back then was crap. And everybody was trying to get a hold of everybody because everybody was at this point watching or calling somebody, telling them about it. And it was just this moment of just like, what is going on? Because there was so much uncertainty, right? Like, are there going to be attacks other places? How many attacks? What's going on? Like, it was just this uncertainty. And every time you would hear a news flash, it felt like somebody was either trying to predict something or something. So it was just like this big, what is happening moment. And it was just such an eerie feeling. I remember that so clearly.
Yeah. I think a lot about what that day would have been like if we were in the social media age that we're in right now. And the types of information that would be out, and would it be right? Would it be incorrect? And it's interesting to reflect on that, and the uncertainty, the way it changed, the way it forever changed so many lives personally, but the way it changed everybody's lives, and the way we do things differently now that we never thought of on September 10th, the day before. Just the way we fly, the way we travel, some of those things that have just become part of our lives. I actually think that the pandemic's going to have, you said that there's what's normal after the pandemic. There'll probably be changes like that. You might bring a mask to a stadium, and if somebody's coughing next to you, maybe you whip out your mask. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
I mean, I do believe, if you talk to anybody from anywhere from the Asian country, you go to China or anything like that, they've been wearing masks for years and years on subways and stuff. I think this will become the norm on high traffic spots. You'll always, for years and years and years to come, always see, even when everybody's been vaccinated or 70% of us have caught it, or whatever the outcome that slows this process down, that takes the fear out of it, and we could go back to somewhat normality. I think masks are going to be something we'll see going forward on a regular basis. Human nature, let's be realistic. Human nature, people tend to forget about things. And people seem to eventually go back to where their comfort is. But I think because this has been such a long process now, it hasn't been like a 3-month, the world's ending, or 4. It has been such a long process. And we're probably still going to deal with this for another year, realistically, probably, if not more. And I think because it'll be such a long process, a lot of these little systems, a lot of these little tools, all these little things that we are constantly doing now, I think are going to be just part of our everyday life.
I think so. And as I talk to business leaders on the podcast and just in general, the sense I'm hearing from business leaders is we're going to use this as an opportunity to learn and probably accelerate adoption of things that we may not have thought about, at the beginning of the pandemic, but now we're forced to look at, like different technologies and different ways of serving clients. And, should we run our business in a more hybrid fashion, as opposed to all brick and mortar? Or so it's going to, I think what's going to happen is the smart business leaders are going to take a step back at the end of this and say, what were we forced to do during this process that we want to continue doing?
Yeah.
And what are the things that are still impediments that we, are going to be just in our pandemic, ready plan?
Yeah. And it's a pandemic has also opened up the globe for us. What I mean by that is, prior to pandemic, I was a very successful businessman in my world. All of a sudden now, the amount of networking, I would have never met somebody like you. I would never have started the podcast. The amount of networking, like I'm dealing with people in the UK and Australia, and now I'm doing business deals with them and stuff I would never have done, because it's just opened up the thing where if I'm in front of a computer, I don't have to worry about somebody just to deal with somebody in Toronto face to face. Now we can deal with somebody in New York or New Jersey and do the same deal with them just by Zoom. So it just opened up the doors, and has also allowed a lot of companies to realize their budgets. Do we need to have everybody in office? Do we need to be paying for this expensive office space? Do I need to have 10 staff internally where I could hire some guy overseas, which was really starting to happen originally, but now it's going to expand that option where we can hire somebody overseas for a quarter of the price and do the exact same job. So I think that it has just opened up. It opened up the globe in a way where it's brought everybody closer together. And now Absolutely. Us as business leaders and workers, we're all now so united, which we were never prior, right?
No, I think it's shown us how interconnected we all are, and it's enabled us to connect in ways that we haven't, and it's lowered the barrier to entry and to do things, right? I mean, maybe there was a scenario 5 years ago where you and I would have said, "Hey, let's record this podcast when I'm in Toronto." Yeah. And the next time I get to Toronto might be in 6 months. And then I come to Toronto and we have every intention of getting together, and then something pops up and you have to go somewhere. And then the next thing you know, we've waited a year to record this podcast because we were trying to be together in Toronto. Now the possibilities are endless. I love your story about how you're doing deals and you're building relationships with people all over the world. And you can go from this Zoom with me here just outside of the Washington, D.C. area in the United States, and you could talk to someone in the UK or talk to someone wherever. It's one of the bright spots.
It's just opened up so much opportunity. And I think the people that are scared to live in the moment and take this opportunity are the ones going to fall back pretty quickly.
I think so.
And if anything, this gave us an opportunity to realize where business is going, where the digital space is going, where brick and mortar, like I was never into brick and mortar. I hate brick and mortar. My business is all wholesale. I like selling to brick and mortar, but I did get affected because now my brick and mortars were all affected. They were all closed down, the gyms. So it made us realize very, very quickly that the world of brick and mortar is never going to be the same. Never.
Correct.
The same. But I do believe it will come back at a different way. Like, to get people back into the basic brick and mortar they're gonna have to be so much more creative, because everybody's on Amazon now. You could literally, there's a comedian I was watching on Netflix the other day, and he had this whole skit on Amazon, and he's like, we have become so lazy where it's like you click on something and it's at your door the next day. And he goes, what's Amazon Prime going to be now? Click on demand. I put my hand out and they put it in my hand. Like he's doing this whole skit on this. I was laughing because we've become so lazy. Like, we don't have that in Canada yet, but I was told in the US with Amazon, they give you a lockbox and they'll put your groceries in your fridge for you already.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. Like, I tell my parents that, old school European, they think I'm like, and I've lost a screw in my head, but it's just where we are all going with this all. And where technology is kind of, it's just taking over our lives, and us, it's not a bad thing. It's us realizing now that certain tasks in our time are very limited. So what can we do with our time, and what's more important at our time? Escorting groceries or spending with our kids? So paying that extra $10 and getting our groceries delivered and spending that time with our kids is obviously a lot more important, right?
Absolutely. I feel as though the technology in the pandemic has accelerated adoption 10 years, right? Yeah. I mean, when I check in with my grandmother and she's saying words like Uber Eats and DoorDash and Amazon Prime, I mean, you realize that things have changed in terms of how we go about procuring products and services. I think there's a lot of positive to it. Like you said, now, you figure out, okay, if I'm able to have somebody pick up some groceries or bring me that meal, I don't have to go out and pick it up. I could spend more time with my children. It enables you to kind of reprioritize, enables you to do things. But I think it also creates challenges because we've become so accustomed to this instant gratification and, lack of planning. Like I'll give you an example, right? I mean, a book pops into my head that I want to read, and I just open the Amazon app, I click purchase, and it's here in 3 days. And then 5 days later, something else pops in my head and I read it. And then I end up with a stack of books, and I end up with a stack of books, and I'm like, okay, this was interesting to me in the moment, like last Wednesday at 3:00. But I think in the past climate, right, where everything wasn't so online and accessible, what you do is you'd go to the bookstore and you'd say, I think I'm going to buy 3 books to take on this business trip. And you'd have to go through this exercise of prioritizing and saying, all right, like, do I want 3? Do I want 4? Like, which 3 do I want? Which one am I going to read first? And I think that's a skill set that is useful and has a lot of applications in life and in business that maybe we're getting away from because it's just at our fingertips.
Yeah. Let's talk about time and family. Let's dive into that. How old are your 2 daughters?
My girls are 5.5 and 3.
So they're baby still. So what is, I usually don't even ask that as a question, but how did your life change, and what has fatherhood meant to you?
Well, it's meant the world. And I didn't know what to expect, going into it, but I think what it does is it shifts your mindset in terms of what you're working for, right? It went from I was working for myself to make money, to grow my brand professionally, to do it. Now I have a team, and I'm working for this team to enable our family and my children to do things that they wanted to do and have opportunities that I had, or create better opportunities for them than I had, or whatever. Right. I think the minute that my first daughter was born, it changed my mindset in what I'm working for, and that I want to work hard because I want to make money to be able to support the family and enable all the opportunities that I had for them to have and for them to pursue their dreams. But I'm also working to set an example for all things I talk about on the podcast, right? To be a great leader, to be a great teammate, to work really hard. And that's not lost on me in the pandemic and working from home the last year, is taking opportunities to show my kids. And again, like you said, they're young, but to show them what I'm working on. Hey, I can think of one night during the pandemic, probably halfway, it's probably 6 months ago, where my little one burst into the home office while I was on a Zoom call. It was a pretty intense call. We had a tight deliverable for a client. And my initial reaction was to kind of, tell her to close the door and go back to playing. But I said, come here. And I put her on my lap, and she counted the boxes on the Zoom. And she was so happy. And I think that was a cool moment for me. I mean, I went from being someone who, traveled quite a bit before the pandemic to now being home, obviously a lot, almost all the time now. It's fatherhood has been really special. And I think going into it, you don't know what to expect, but the fact that you're responsible to set an example and provide the resources necessary for other people to have opportunities is really, really special.
Yeah. And it's so crazy. Your little ones are still young, but I think we talked about this is the lessons you're teaching them as a direct mentor, but also as an indirect mentor. There's a lot of things like you bring them into your world and letting them sit on your lap, I think is very special. And it's something I do all the time where if I'm having a business meeting or I'm having a podcast or if I'm doing anything, my kids are there, I'll be like, hey, come say hi, because I want them to see what I do. I want them to be involved. And also be honest. I mean, you might be a little different because you are working with a corp, but if as a self-employed entrepreneur, if I'm dealing with somebody and if they have an issue with my kids being here, then I don't want to deal with that person. That's not the type of person I want to do business with. So it opens up the light and everything too. As an entrepreneur, I always tell my kids what I'm doing. And I try to show, mine's are a little different. They're 12 and 14 now. So they're really at the age where they want to be touching and feeling and seeing everything. They want to be part of stuff, right? They want to see what dad's doing. So I include them in a lot of it because I want them to see like, hey, like when I started writing my book, I started my book in March, got a pen and paper, started writing the book. And I just released it the other day. And it was just like, here, like, this is all the work I did. It was for this reason. So they understand the work ethic. They learn the work ethic. And I told them, and it's funny because when I told them in March, I remember telling my daughter and my son, I'm like, I'm going to write this book. And by early next year, we'll be #1 seller. And my daughter's like, you can't say that, Dad. You don't know that. I'm like, listen, I'm going to be a #1 seller. So it was that thing. And I don't know if you saw that. We released our book in the first 5 days. I got #1 in 11 categories on Amazon, which is insane.
Wow.
But it was one of those things where it's like I try and to me that's teaching them a lesson of hard work and ethic and putting yourself out there. If you want to do something and you work hard, you're going to get it. So everything I try to do is a lesson with them. And as your daughters get older, it's just constant lessons indirectly and directly, which is so special, right? I mean, there's nothing like the unconditional love of your child, right? And especially you got daughters, so you're taking care of. You got 2 daughters, so no matter what, how old and how long as you're good to them, how old and how ruggedly you get, you're always going to be taken care of, right?
That's right. That's right. And you know, it's especially with my older one now, you know, she's in kindergarten. She can understand a little bit more about what I'm doing day to day. If I have to, if I can't, if I have a meeting that causes me to miss dinner one night during the week now, cause I'm at home, I'll explain to her, hey, this is what I'm working on. I'm working on this. You know, a client really needs me to focus on this because, you know, daddy knows this, and this. And daddy's, you know, the only one at the company who can figure out this. And or, hey, you know, daddy has to have a meeting with somebody on his team because, you know, that's what I'm a teammate. I'm a teammate too. And this is something that's important. And I don't want to leave that person. And I give them an example. I say, if you were, you know, working on building a puzzle with your friend and you ran and your friend ran off to do something else and you were left to finish the puzzle by yourself and you had started working on that puzzle together, how would you feel? And so I've learned more recently in particular to try and share those stories. And the podcast is another thing that has really, especially with my older one, she's taken interest in. She'll see, you know, a recording or something on the screen when we're preparing to release a new episode. And she'll say, Daddy, who is that? And no matter who it is, I'll tell her, you know, the name of the person, what they do, and that, you know, if you work hard and you put your mind to it, you can do what they did too. And that doesn't matter, you know, if it's Tessa Virtue, the 3-time gold medal Olympic figure skater from Canada, a nonprofit CEO, the CEO of Top Golf, an elite college basketball coach, musician, an author. I tell her, hey, if you work hard, you put your mind to it, you can do what this person did too. But most importantly, this person is very successful because they treat people the right way, they work hard, and they show respect and pride in what they do.
Yeah. It's always about the lessons. I'm gonna ask. Usually, like I said, I usually don't have set questions. I always have just one question at the end. I ask all my guests. I'll get to that one in a second. What's your favorite baseball? Your 400.
That's a great question. You know, it's funny. I mean, I have, there's so many interesting ones. You know, I would say, you know, the one that always comes to
if you had to get rid of your whole collection, let me rephrase that. If you had to get rid of your whole collection for some reason, you needed the money or something happened in your life and you're only allowed to keep one, which one would you keep?
Well, okay, I'll give you the answer to this one. So it's a Hall of Famer, but it's not maybe one of the greatest players of all time.
Doesn't matter.
It's Tom Glavine, the great Braves and Mets pitcher.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. And this gets back to family and connection and relationships. My dad and I, for many, many years, go to spring training. We go to watch the Mets and some other teams train, and we bring some baseballs, and occasionally you can get some guys to sign balls, there at spring training. We went for years and always we never saw Tom Glavine. We could never get, we always wanted Tom Glavine's autograph. We always liked him. He would sign and he would just walk away. He'd be done. We just miss him, or he was hurt and he couldn't. And then one year, my dad and I said, let's just wake up early one morning and get to the ballpark early. And sure enough, we're walking through the parking lot, and there Tom Glavine strolls up. It's just me, my dad, and him. And we had a chance to tell him, some of our favorite memories, and he signed that ball for us. And again, I'll always remember that because it's a Hall of Famer.
But it was connected also to a story. And my dad, and it reminds me of these trips that I hope we can get back to soon, where we go and we watch, father son, we sit, we watch baseball, eat hot dogs, and talk about our favorite memories. Yeah, and I think we talked about this prior. That's something we started 4 years ago. Me and my son and my wife and my daughter, we do a road trip every year where we do a minor league. We do a minor league team and we do a major league team. So we went to New York. That was one. I actually caught a ball in the outfield, a home run ball. I still have it in my son's room, and my son was on TV on Sportnet that night on TV. So we went to New York. We do the whole experience. We actually go through the whole subways. We do the whole New York experience. We did Pittsburgh. We kept doing the cities. And then this year we were supposed to go to Chicago in 2020 to do Wrigley, and then that happened. So we've been to Myrtle Beach. We've been to the Pelicans minor league there. So Myrtle Beach Pelicans. So we always trying minor league and major league. We try to do one or two every single year as a kind of a road trip. So we miss that. I can't wait to get back to that part of it as well.
Absolutely. Some of my favorite memories are seeing different baseball stadiums, and that summer working in the minor league stadium. I really tried to remind myself, the days are long and it's hot, and sometimes the work is not that glamorous, but never lose sight of the fact that you're working at a baseball stadium.
Yeah,
and
I love that.
And there's something about the grass and the crack of the bat.
I'm a huge baseball guy, right? And I don't even know this, this or not, but I was coaching baseball for almost 3 years, and I'm really certified and qualified to coach baseball. I pulled out because my son was getting to the age where I'm very competitive, and I was allowing that to get between our relationship, and I really didn't want that. So I pulled out, but as a coach, I was a head coach of our traveling rep team for almost 3 years. So I love baseball. I'm actually still part of a baseball board. So I'm a huge baseball guy, and I played baseball. Actually, I lived in Canada, but my sport growing up, and I actually always thought I was going to make the majors, was baseball. I played competitive baseball for years.
Well, and I know there's people who say, it's that the season is too long. 162 games is way too many. The game is
greatest sport. I love it.
Greatest sport, because to me it's like life. It's like business. It's every single day. Maybe you get an off day once in a while, but you have to grind. You have ups and downs. And two football teams play each other, right? I mean, there's a clock. And some people, what I love about baseball, there is no clock. We don't know how and when this thing is going to end, and you never know what you're going to see.
Such a great game. So last question I have for you, Andrew, is if something were to happen to you today, in a few words, how would you want to be remembered by your loved ones?
I would want to be remembered as somebody who gave people more than he received. So I gave more than I took from them, and that I was somebody who that they saw as somebody who authentically cared about the people around him, and I think that's what I would want to be remembered for.
Love it, love it, love it, love it. How could our listeners get a hold of you?
Well, the best way to find me is on Instagram at Andrew Moses 123. That's Andrew Moses 123. And then, of course, the podcast, Everybody Pulls the Tarp, is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much wherever podcasts are streamed.
Love it, brother. I appreciate you. I appreciate this conversation. I'm looking forward to future conversations. And I'm going to put on all our show notes how to get a hold of Andrew, how to follow him, all the links to his podcast, also for his social media feeds and all that. And once again, thank you, brother. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been a ton of fun. Let's do it again sometime.
Thank you, brother. That's a wrap for today. I want to thank our guest, Andrew Moses, for being such a great guest, taking time in his busy schedule. Great conversation. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Please, like all week, spread the word. Tell your friends, tell your family. Leave a review. 5 stars would be absolutely amazing. We always love spending time reading the reviews. Until next week, guys, keep moving forward.